Hi, I'm Sue Swinand, and today we're close to home on a beautiful day in Shrewsbury, and my guest is Eugenie Lewalski Berg, who is a fabulous artist. I think you're going to love her work. It's minimal and conceptual, but sensual at the same time, and full of interesting ideas and processes that we'll be explaining to you. So, Eugenie Lewalski Berg, otherwise known as Jean, thanks for joining us.
Hi, Sue.
Glad to be here.
I'm glad to stop by.
I want to tell you a little bit about Jean, but I have a hard time remembering details, so I'm going to read you a little bit of her resume. You actually started out as a nurse, is that correct?
I went to Northeastern University for
She
nursing.
has a diverse background, but she somehow manages to stay afloat as an artist as well, and has been really working as an artist for many years. She received her MFA from the School of Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, and Tufts University, and her BFA from Mass College of Art, and was the recipient of numerous awards and grants, including the Boyd competition, for 2 years. She was chosen to represent the School of Museum of Fine Arts, Boston, in the College Art Association exhibition Selections from New England and MFA Programs, 1995. Her work has been selected for the sculptural outdoor exhibitions at Chesterwood out in Western Mass in 1995 and 1998. It's a wonderful place to visit, the estate of Daniel Chester French in Western Mass. She's been in the Small Works International, Works on Paper, New England, New York, New Talent at UMass Amherst, and New England New Talent at the Fitchburg Art Museum in 2008. She's been in shows in New York, Elements 2000, and for many years she also worked as a visual merchandising and freelance photo stylist with clients including Brookstone, Agfa LL Bean, White Flower Farm, and her work has been featured on numerous book covers and textbooks. During a brief hiatus, she worked back in the medical world and was coordinator for a psychiatric unit and a manager of an elder health center. But she's now back full-time in the studio and a recent recipient of the Arts Worcester Materials Grant just this last month. And actually, she's exhibiting in that exhibit now at Arts Worcester on Main Street in Worcester, Mass. So anyway, what a wonderful background, and I'm dying to see more of your work.
Great.
So I thought we'd start off with this piece, when did this piece come about?
This was in graduate school, and it's about sheep configurations in Avebury, England. I took a trip
That
over.
was sheep.
Sheep
Go
configurations.
ahead.
These are my sheep. When I went there, instead of painting Big Ben or whatever in England, I ended up looking at the sheep on the hillside in Avebury and realized that they were in 3 configurations, either an oval around their watering hole, or they moving across the field literally, or randomly in the fields. So it's a combination of both painting and printmaking. I cut a stamp and stamped it 1 billion times.
What I love about it is the grand scale, like you're completely immersed in this grass. If you look up closely, when she says she stamped it, you can see that it's thousands of little blades of grass vertically repeating and repeating and repeating, but it really gives you a soft feeling of the grass. You were saying you were in love with Walt Whitman's
Leaves of Grass. That's one of my favorite books and my favorite poet. I used grass a lot in my work early on.
Yeah, I remember some of your grass pieces. The other thing I notice about this piece, and which you'll see again and again, is the repetition of a unit that repeats and varies and repeats and varies, both in the shapes of the sheep and the way she organized them in 3 different ways, but also in the repeat of the little minimal vertical line, or the just repetition of line, I think is one of the things I associate with your work as well. So tell us more about the grass and how that figures into the work.
Well, through reading Leaves of Grass and working with cheesecloth and planting seeds and grass seed in the little packets of cheesecloth, I ended up making large pillowcase sizes of cheesecloth, filled them with soil. Terry Priest showed them in her gallery, and I also used them for my thesis project. So thinking about being recycled, that someday I will be grass. And so the packets were about 12 inches wide and 5 feet 4 inches tall, and I hung them from the ceiling, and the grass came out the top of it and the roots came out the bottom, and they were just amazing.
I remember seeing those, and that work really knocked me out. It filled the space, and it was real.
Yes.
It was real. It was sculpting with living material, which I always think gardening is like that too. But to see those things hanging in that space, it really was. It had all different emotional responses as far as I could see.
Yeah, it was sad and reassuring, and it's hard to face that on a daily basis. So I did a whole lot.
You mean the idea of it being like a mound over your...
Yeah, mound over your body, being buried. At that point, I faced all of those fears through my work.
Now you may notice this piece is a series of drawings, but if you look closely, you can see that the idea of the grass and the repetition and the gesture repeats just as it did in that big green mural that we were looking at. Tell us more about this piece.
Well, this is my daily drawing project. Every day at noontime, I would stop whatever I was doing and go to the studio and do one of these drawings. I set up, I like working within a system, so I set up these rules that I could only use pencil. I think they were 5 inches square. I could only use vertical lines, and I did one every day for several months. So this is only, I think, like 18 or 20 of them.
How many did you do the whole year?
Oh, I've done projects for the whole year, but this one, I think it was probably 3 months long.
Wow. So you could hang a gigantic wall of these, and they would all be variations on the theme.
Yes.
And I like the idea and think it's very productive to have limitations, set limits for yourself.
Yeah, I love bumping up against these rules.
Yes.
And then ricocheting back and coming up with something else.
And forcing yourself to invent within the parameters.
Yeah, and at one point I broke the rules. I ended up using a little bit of graphite, powdered graphite, and some of the wax medium, cold wax medium, to add a different background. So they became very print-like, some of them.
One of the sentences I always remember is the idea that water is so amorphous, and without banks you have no form.
That's great.
And the banks make the river. They make the shape. So that's a very cool idea. Now you said powdered graphite. How did that material influence you differently, or how do materials in general play a part in your work?
Well, I'm a real material junkie. Material and processes motivate me. Being a sculpture major in school, undergrad sculpture major, we had access to all kinds of materials, and it was invigorating to me to play with and push and experiment with and combine materials. So
you do a lot of combining of
I do.
disparate materials,
I do.
which really gives it a freshness, I think.
Yeah, it propels me, it motivates me, it gets me into that studio. Unmolding a casting I did before, it's like Christmas morning to see if it works. If it doesn't work, you have to start all over again.
So the material itself moves you forward because you're waiting to see what it will do.
Sure.
I know, I forget who it was, some famous artist said, if you want to refresh your work or change your work, change your materials. And it does. It gives you a whole new vocabulary,
That's right.
you might say.
That's right.
So these are mostly just graphite, but you use some powdered graphite, which gave you a different voice in the works.
It did.
Very interesting.
Thank you.
Let's look at some more.
Okay.
Now we're in Jean's studio, and there's so much to see here. I noticed that you have some photographs up, and these relate, or these were part of the grass piece?
These were in conjunction with the grass piece. These were mounted on the wall next to the hanging grass pieces.
So you were documenting the grass? Or?
Well, this was a large grass blanket I had on my bed, and it goes into the idea of resting place, that it's both my headboard of the bed as well as grass growing on it, and then moving to the family tombstone with the grass. But I also did, you must be referring to my weekly series that I shot
Well,
my
I know
bed.
you did a bed series
That's
where
right.
you photographed the unmade bed
Every Sunday morning I would photograph my bed, and I would also go outside and shoot the same plot of grass. And I did that every Sunday for a year. So that was another set of rules that I like bumping up against.
And again, a process and
process,
repetitive action.
And it just made me work. You know, if I set this up, this schedule, it makes me work.
It's a beautiful photograph, too.
Oh, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And then, you know, I couldn't help noticing these, which, again, you've moved into such a different material here. Now, what is this?
Well, that's cement, cast cement, which I cast with vermiculite or perlite to make it lighter, to hang on the wall. And I put a hanging thing there.
So these would stand on the wall
they mount
in
on the walls.
sequences.
Yep.
And doesn't this remind you of the drawings? So these things would go up on the wall.
Just like that.
And they're like the grass. They're exactly like the grasses, but in 3D.
Well, and
it is and it isn't.
Well, it is, and the idea of the cement is just such a seductive surface. If I cast it against slick plastic, it comes out shiny and smooth.
Wow.
If I cast it against something rougher, I end up with big holes in it. This one happens to be covered with encaustic, so I was seduced by the cement, and then of course the encaustic wax is such a lovely, smelly, wonderful thing to work with.
The face of this, if you can see, is encaustic, and then there are little touches of brush strokes and incising.
Yes, I incise it and fill it and scrape it.
But also this mellow, deep surface of the wax and the way it rests into the cement. But each one, the surface is, look at how that one has a little glare on it, or the beautiful shapes you get just by the process of the cement not forming exactly.
Oh,
it's organic.
I love the irregularities of it.
As much as these are cubes and very geometric, they have all that organic texture and little shapes that result from the process. These are gorgeous.
Thank you. I used the encaustic more as a sculpture medium instead of a painterly medium. So I actually cast the concrete and cast the encaustic alongside it.
Now, is this...
That's how I hung it. That was early on.
Because the back is cool too. But look at the detail of this and how beautiful the waxes are layered like Jello, you know.
Yeah, and something like this, I would.
Oh, it's beautiful.
I would actually cast the encaustic first, then cast the cement over it. So I was really process driven, process and material driven. I have a lot of failures too.
Even the way this bends in just a little bit, or the way this is so rough and like the surface of the moon or something, and then these very smooth, perfect layers of the encaustic. Wow, that is lovely.
Thank you.
Let's show one more. And again, the juxtaposition of materials and the seductiveness of that deep color and the kind of line she gets with where the encaustic melts into the cement.
And letting it go, letting it each material be what they are, and let them flow. So knowing when to push material and knowing when to step back and let the material do its own thing. I love that whole thing.
Holding on and letting go.
That's right, Susan.
Oh boy! But imagine these hung in a series on a wall. How they would have such a presence.
Well, they did. I was in a one-person show up at Lowell University, and they surrounded the whole gallery.
With how many?
Oh, it was like 50 of them.
50 of these.
Yeah.
Wow. I want to be sure to show you some of Jean's drawings because they're so fabulous and they relate to the other work in the same but different, Tell us a little bit about these.
These are graphite crayons that have been put on very thickly and then rubbed to start until they gleam.
So it looks like metal. Doesn't it look like lead?
But before that, I emboss them with just strips of cardboard placed underneath, and I very carefully go through
So
the
is
entire...
the paper wet or dry?
No, this paper is dry. This is just bristle pad.
So you're
bristle
laying
board.
the paper over a raised hard
surface, and I go along the edges with whatever.
And the paper stretches a little bit, so you get that.
Yeah, I use a crochet hook sometimes because I can get in and out of each.
And it's
each
smooth.
piece. Smooth, and it looks like metallic. It looks metal.
Really understanding materials, but the fact that these are like the other pieces with their minimal quality, and yet they have this patterning with the geometry.
Yeah, this is similar to the grass, and you can actually see my strokes of the graphite crayon in this one. And you can actually see a drawing underneath it of a different grade of graphite crayon.
So depending on the material, the same kind of image and thought changes the look completely.
Yep.
These are great. So now we're going to show you what Jean is working on now, and this is what you're showing over at the Jewish Community Center now.
At the JCC and at Arts Worcester right now. I'm doing Japanese woodblock prints on Sheena plywood. It's an interesting mix for me of a sculpture and 2D work because I get to carve the blocks, which I love. That's my favorite part of this whole process. So this is actually, I'm doing a block, a 2D version of a 3D piece of mine called Six Couples. And I've already done my preliminary drawings, trying to work out my colors and my order because I work reductively. So I keep taking away material. So anything I wanted white in my print, I carve that away first. So that would be the white of the paper showing through. So I've done a couple of different levels right now. This is where I am so far.
Okay.
And everything is wet. Japanese woodblock, you use wet paper with watercolor ink, so watercolor paint. So I'm going to get the block ready before I do some printing. So the first thing you do, your block is damp. I'm going to add a little bit of water to it. And you use rice paste. That makes the inks go on smoothly.
It makes the a little more viscous and thick, right?
It makes it a little thicker, but it also makes a smooth finish to it. If I want a pebbly finish, I cut back on the paste. Sometimes you would you would want a pebbly finish.
Look at how blue that looks on the pink ground. Isn't that interesting?
And then you combine the two together on the block. So you're mixing the paste with your ink.
With a little brush that
Well,
kind of
it's got
spreads
a flat bottom. And
Now
you-
this will be very transparent, I guess.
I have a little bit of white in this because I printed all the pink, and because I'm working reductively, it's layer upon layer. So you start with the lightest color and you work up to the darkest color.
And when she says working reductively, some of you may have heard, we used to call it waste block, which means you take the block of wood, and if you cut into it and print, let's say yellow, where you cut into it would be white. Then you cut in, and where you cut in on the second printing would be yellow. And then each time you ink it, you leave those colors.
Yeah, and there's no going back. It's called a suicide block because you cannot go back. And you have to, if you make a mistake, you either live with it or you start over again. So I'm just wiping off.
The alternative would be to use multiple blocks.
Yeah, usually traditionally in the traditional mokuhanga, they use a block for every color. It's
Yes.
a color
And then you would be
separation,
able to redo the print.
and then you can redo it. It's color separation. But for some reason, my brain works better with this technique. I don't know why, but it does. So you've got to smooth it over very carefully because every brush stroke, even with this crazy flat brush,
Can show.
shows. So I do two pieces. I work with two different papers. This is my proof print, and it's just Reeves printmaking, Reeves heavyweight. And with Japanese woodblock, my registration is this Kento mark.
So
that
there's
once
a little raised corner that holds the paper just exactly in the right position.
and it's a
To
corner,
help
and
you
it's a
place
flat.
it so that the things all line up.
And I cover it with a piece of parchment paper.
Primarily so you don't
To
rub
make,
the
to make
paper.
it smooth.
Exactly.
Smooth, and then I use my Baron to get my impression. And there's so many variables with this process. The thickness of the ink, the pressure I use, the paper I use, the viscosity of everything, the dampness, every time you
The
do it.
hardness of the Baron.
Yeah, every time you do it, there's so many variables. And so my two proof prints are with Reeves, and so I have to use quite a hard pressure, whereas I go to the Japanese paper and I use a soft pressure. So what I've got on my difference between this block and the last block are just these three little marks, the three little highlights. And I'm also doing these squares.
Uh-huh.
I'm also
So
working on
this
these.
is three colors now or four?
No, it's only two colors. It's a pink and a gray.
I mean,
But-
how many times did you print?
Oh, probably 10 times already. So
Oh,
there's
my.
there's a white, there's several shades
And
of
that's
pink.
why you have variations within the color.
There's several
Yeah.
shades, light
Okay.
pink, a darker pink, a medium pink, and now I'm starting just the gray process. And until I want this background a dark gray. And then
Okay.
there's going to be
Okay.
a black line going around the whole thing, and that will be
one
the
of
final
the unique
thing.
things about this process is that, what is it called again?
Mokuhanga.
Mokuhanga. And one of the unique things is that it's water-based. Whereas most woodblock printing you've probably seen is with a roller and an ink base.
And it's oil-based.
Oil-based ink.
Oil-based. This is perfectly safe to do at home. I use my old watercolors and the rice paste, and it's completely green.
And you can get a lot more transparencies.
You can layer all those watercolors.
Ink the block, or you actually paint the block with the watercolor. You can do it with gradations.
Yes, you can. There are all
And
kinds of techniques.
Exactly.
Yeah, all kinds of techniques. Now, after I finish painting, I have an addition of 8 going right here. So after I go through the 8 and do that technique, what I just did, I will let this block dry, and I will carve out everything I want that color.
That grayish pink.
Just that dark, that darker gray color, everything I want. So I know I want these two, this square, this circle carved out, all of these. So I'll wait till the block is dry and carve it, and then reprint.
Print it, and it will leave, what you've carved will be the color you just printed.
Yes, what I carved, what
Excellent.
I took away.
Excellent. Now, you got a materials needs grant from Arts Worcester for this special paper?
Yes, this is Eshizan Kozo, and it's very expensive. It comes in a very large sheet, but it's pretty expensive. So they were generous enough to give me a needs grant to buy 25 sheets of it. So
this is what you're working on now?
well, this is
You're
what I worked on for the
focusing-
past year. I got
I
it.
see.
It was
Okay.
last year. I had the money last year, so this is the kind of work I was doing.
So it's a lot more organic to me in terms of the shape and form.
Well, at that point, I was still learning this technique, and it's very fussy. So I used it to I wasn't so content heavy.
You wanted to go with the traditional means and methods.
That's right.
I see.
That's right.
I see. Because these are very, very, very different from the linear, minimal things. They're lovely, and the transparencies are very subtle. So now you also have a show at the Jewish Community Center of this type of work?
Yes, it's prints, paintings, and drawings, and it's at the Jewish Community Center on Salisbury Street in Worcester.
We didn't even touch on the tip of the Jean Berg here because she has paintings and so many other things that we haven't gotten to. But you know what? You can see a lot more of her work on the website. What's your website?
My whole name, EugenieLewalskiBerg.com.
And you can also email her, or you can come to her studio, which is absolutely lovely, and see more of her work, because there's an awful lot to see. I wish we had more time, but thank you so much,
Thank you,
Jean.
Susan.
I really enjoyed this. It was great.
Thank you. It was nice having you here.
Well, thanks again for joining us, and we hope to see you another time for the next edition of Arts and Ideas.